Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 98, and it's always one of my favorite ones. The early dive into the data for the new format, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Before we go into that, obviously, thanks to my sponsors, I would like to thank mtgazone.com. I'm going to write that one down tomorrow and put it as an article as well. So if you maybe are more into reading than to listening, it's going to be available. I'll try to put the links wherever I can. Thanks also to my patrons. No new patrons to report this week, but you can always join if you want to have more new patrons next week. And we can move to my preamble. And this preamble is based sort of on this early data analysis linked to it. And it's based on the question, carriage or horse? Which one is data for limited metagame? And this question, I wanted to post it because there is lots of people there are at least some people that complain about limited data and say that it's ruining the game because it helps solving formats quicker and it's driving innovation too fast, and then the format feels stale for the rest of it. So I decided to test it a bit with maths. It's not a super rigorous study, but at least I think it gives some of the answers that you can use. And to do it, I wanted to see how does the day one data impact what's going on later. And the hypothesis is, of course, that if data would be the carriage, if the horse of the metagame, which means that data would be pulling the metagame in its direction, I would expect that if you see the data from day one, later more people are going to be playing decks that were good on day one because they saw in the data that those decks were good and they started drafting with preference or forcing those decks or something like that. You can see on day one, the top winning deck was Selesnya with 60%. Then we have Izzet with 60%, Boros with 59.5%, Azorius with 59.2%. And then we have a drop, 58 for Groove, 56.5 for Dimir, 55 for Rakdos. And then at the end, we have like 54% for Simic and Golgari and 53% for Orzhov. So this is what the power was telling us in the first week. But how did we get to those situations? How many people played each of those color combinations? And I kept the same order. So we start with Selesnya. Only 4.5% of the people played Selesnya, despite it being the highest win rate deck. So this is the kind of thing that they see. Okay, first day, people didn't realize that Selesnya was great, but the data shows that Selesnya is great. So I would expect this number to go drastically high if people are following data in order to draft. Then we see, interestingly, that the other decks until Simic, so Izzet, Boros, Azorius, Gruul, Dimir, Rakdos, and Simic, are sort of drafted based on their power level. So Izzet and Boros are the most drafted, then Azorius slightly less, and then it just drops off until Simic. But then we see that Golgari and Orzhov were drafted more than we would expect from the fact that they were the two least winning decks. And then again, I would expect that both Orzhov, especially Orzhov, but also Golgari would drop in terms of how much they are drafted. And these should more or less stay the same. So this is if the people would just watch the data and blindly follow it. This is the extreme case. I'm expecting something in the middle happening there in terms of how people change their habits over the first couple of days. So this is how it actually changed. We saw that Selesnya was drafted 4.5% of the time. Now it's drafted on day 3. It was drafted 5% of the time. So very, very minimal change. 0.5 percentage points. It's not much at all. Izzet was drafted slightly more. That's something that you would expect. But again, 1.4 percentage points more drafted. Boros actually dropped in the rate of being drafted, despite being the third most winning color on the day one. Dropped by 0.7 percentage points. And then we see Azorius, which increased by 3.6 percentage points. That's quite a big jump in Azorius, despite on day one it only being the fourth most winning color with a 59%. Not far behind the other three, but still behind the other three. And despite that being behind, it increased by quite a lot. Then there was a slight increase in Gruul, roughly 1 percentage point, and small drops for Dimir, Rakdos, Simic, and Golgari. And quite a large drop by Orzhov, but still not to the point that it was the least drafted archetype. So I would say that this data shows me that maybe there is an impact of data on what's going on, because we did see that those best colors mostly improved in how often they are played. The worst colors, they slightly dropped. But there are also some weird surprises, like, for example, Azorius. If the data would be dictating it, Azorius would not have the biggest increase of all the colors. It would be Selesnya or Irzit or something like that. So let's compare the win rates of the decks, and we see that both Selesnya on day 3 dropped by almost 4 percentage points, from 60 to 56. Izzet stayed more or less the same, basically no change. Boros dropped by almost 3 percentage points, from 59.5 to 56.8. And Azorius increased from 59.2 to 60%, despite also increasing in how frequently it was drafted. So despite increasing by almost 3.5 percentage points in frequency of its play. Then we also see some drops for Gru, we see some drops for Demir, we see some drops for Rakdos in terms of the win rate. Not as dramatic as the drop in Selesnya. And basically all the other colors had minimal or slightly more than minimal drops in its win rate. So this is interesting that Azorius was not the most winning deck on day 1, but it had the biggest increase between day 1 and day 3, and also was the deck that increased in win rate. And this makes me think that the biggest change that we observed between day 1 and day 3 is not driven by data as per se. It's driven by people figuring out that Azorius is just very good based on fundamentals, because data didn't indicate that it's so good. And they were rewarded because they started drafting it more, and also because they started drafting it more, the win rate paradoxically increased, which you wouldn't expect. You would expect if they start drafting it more, the win rate might drop a bit. So I would say, based on those data, you can say that actually it's the expertise, the punditry that is driving the data, and not the vice versa. I would say there's a bigger impact of what people talk about than what data is suggesting on how the metagame is shaping in those early days. This, of course, doesn't mean that data doesn't have an impact. I'm pretty sure that individual card data change how people evaluate certain cards. They're maybe much more willing to try some cards if they are knowledgeable of the data existing. But the problem is that lots of people are not knowledgeable about data existing. They just draft based on their feeling and what they hear from content creators, and that's going to have a much more significant impact of what's going on. Of course, here we are testing 17 land users. You would hope that if you use 17 lands, you sometimes check the data, especially when the format is early. And still, despite that happening, it doesn't seem like there is a very strong pull on what's going on in the format. And again, you see that Selesnya, being the number 1 deck of the day 1, only very slightly increased in popularity, and true to what the players didn't put all in on Selesnya, the win rate of that deck dropped. So they were right. They were right not to trust the first day data, because the first day data is based on very small sample sizes, flukes, playing against decks that are badly built, and things like that. So it's very difficult to put 100% trust in the first game data, and I'm advocating for that every single time I'm presenting. And Absenta HC in the chat has a very good point, and that is that Azorius started more like a control deck, but aggro version is also quite good, and I think people caught on that this aggro version is pretty strong, and I would agree with that. Although I still think that the controlling version can be really, really strong as well. Okay, so that's the preamble, hopefully. But I also have the patron question of the week. It's a question that was asked still in the WoW times, but I didn't have a good answer then. It was more specific about interaction between bargain and bounce spells. But we have come to the conclusion that maybe we can change the question to what makes bounce spells good in the format. And that question is by Trezio, one of my patrons who are in the tier that allows to ask a question of the week if they have any. And that's a pretty decent perk that you can get from being at a certain level of my patron. Right, so I decided to look at deeper into all those bounce spells and all those spells that put something on top of the library or on the bottom of the library, depending on the wording. Hey, Trezio, in the chat as well. So I looked at all the cards that have that effect in the last set since Midnight Hunt. And first thing that I noticed is that almost all of them have a decent win rate. We see Revenge of the Drown being the best one. I only looked at the common ones because I thought it would be fair to compare commons with commons. Otherwise, we go into the problem of some of them being busted uncommons and whatnot. But Revenge of the Drown, 60.8, one of the best blue commons in the last 2 years. So that's already a good indicator, but it doesn't drop off that far when you go to cards like Desynchronize, who, I don't know, maybe not even all of you remember that Desynchronize was a card in one of the previous formats. It had 57.6 win rate, despite costing 5 mana indeed. Tolarian Gazer is the second with 60.1. Then we have Ephara's Dispersal, 59.1. These are all like, top 10 blue commons of the last 2 years. And then Moonsnare Specialist, which is technically a bounce spell. Unlucky Drop at 58.5 from the new set. Really good numbers, at least for the first days. But Machine Over Matter, I remember that card being in the format, but I don't remember it particularly oppressive or anything. Still 58% win rate as a common is not bad. Run Out of Town, Desynchronized, Brackish Blunder, they are all at the 57, kind of 58% game and hand win rate. And then we have a slight drop of Johann Stopgap, 56.4, Geistwave, 56. And two that are quite behind everything else is Alchemist's Retrieval from Crimson Vow at 55, and Misleading Modes at 53.4 from the last set. Generally, when you look at all of those things, you see that all those bounce spells were pretty good, independent of the format. I think that the differences were more linked to the additional things that the spell did and the rate on the spell. So like Revenge of the Drown making a 2/2 Decade Zombie was great. Also, it was helped by the fact that blue was really, 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 really strong in Midnight Hunt. I think that 6 of the top 10 blue commons, according to my recalculation of the win rate, are from Midnight Hunt. Tolarian Gazer was obviously a strong card because it drew a card on top of everything. That kind of effect in recent years was reserved for uncommon versions of those spells, and here it was uncommon. Ephara's Dispersal, discount that can cost 1, and also Surveil 2, which is really close to draw a card, made this card great. But also like vanilla sort of spells like Unlucky Drop, Run Out of Town, Desynchronize, had still decent win rate. What this graph doesn't show is formats where those spells were not present. And one of those formats was Phyrexia OB1, a format where blue was notoriously bad, didn't have any of those effects. Also, Heroes of Baldur's Gate did not have those effects, and also you could see that in the blue. Blue was absolutely terrible. So I think that bounce, I think, is universally good. There can be some individual problems with it, and some game styles will be more conducive to playing those bounce spells and those put the things on top. But in general, all of them are good. And I think that my guess would be bounce is going to be the better, the more aggressive or tempo-oriented blue decks can be. That's why I think we didn't see them, Johann Stopgat and Misleading Notes, being slight outliers on the lower spectrum of the win rate in Wilds of Eldraine, because blue wanted to be more controlling. And in a controlling deck, putting something on top is not that big of a benefit, because the games are going to, your plan is to make the game last much longer. And of course, bouncing something when the game is last longer is not a very good effect, because they are going to play it back. They will have time to start attacking with it. When you have a turn one creature, turn 2 creature, turn 3 creature, and you top your mana curve with something like Unlucky Drop, that Unlucky Drop can be backbreaking for the opponent, because you are putting a lot of pressure by putting 1, 2, and 3 drop. But if you play Misleading Notes and then you play draw 3 cards and then you want to make the game last 7 more turns, it gives you a bit of breathing space. But it's you pay for that breathing space with cards, and in long term it's not going to be so great. So that's why I think Even though Johann Stopgap in some of those other sets would be extremely powerful, here it was not. So that's my long, convoluted answer to what makes bounce good. It's universally good, but it will be better the more aggressive blue is in a particular format. Right, let's move to the main topic. And I start with the color popularity rankings. This is based on the first 5 days of the format. And I took all the decks that had colors indicated in them, and I counted what percentage of the time each color was seen in the decks, basically, and normalized it so that it adds up to 100 in the end. So there are 3 colors that are played more frequently than you would expect. In a perfectly balanced format, you would say that 20% of the colors that were played in total would be, well, each color would be 20% because there are 5 colors, of course, and you have 100% of all the decks. 3 of the colors are above that average. Red in 24% of the decks, and then white and blue around 22.5% of the decks. And 2 are lagging behind, black 16% of the decks, and green particularly low at 14.4% of the decks. So, well, basically 17 lands avoid green and black, and then want to play red, and then to slightly lesser extent white and blue over those first few days. In terms of win rates, as always, 17 lands users have a pretty good understanding what is winning. Top color was blue with 57.2% win rate, but honestly, you couldn't squeeze a penny between all those. Blue is at 57.2, red is at 56.9, and white is at 56.8. So there's like a 0.4 percentage points difference between the top color and the third one. And then we have a significant drop, and in 4th place you have green with 55% win rate. So average win rate was 56.1 for this particular analysis. So like 1.1 percentage points below, and black way below at 53.4. So black seems to be lagging pretty significantly behind in terms of what is winning. LCI is a very 2-color format in terms of how people are playing it. I'm not saying that multicolor decks are not possible. Jason ILTG has written, I am assuming, I didn't read it yet, but a great guide on playing multicolor decks, and that is on their website. I think you need to be their patron, but I think that it's worth being a patron of Jason, especially when they are going to start churning out some articles. So you should at least consider it. But most people just stick to the 2-color decks. Around 95% of the decks are either 2-color or 2-color with splash. 3/4 of the decks are just straight 2 colors, and then around 20% of them is 2 colors and splash. And then there's like 3% of the 3-color decks, and then fractions of a percentage of anything more. Most interestingly about it, normally you see that the monocolor decks are winning slightly more because they don't come together that often, and when they do, it means that the color was particularly open. But in this format, monocolor decks even don't do that well on their own. They have roughly 54-55% win rate, while the 2-color decks without any splashes will have 57.2% average win rate. And then we have a big drop to 54 for 2 colors and splash. So you're losing 3 percentage points by splashing on average. And another 4 percentage points drop to 3-color decks with 50% win rate and 3 colors and splash at 49.1. So Jason can draft those multicolor amalgams, but not many people can. And I think it will take time to develop some technology how to do it. And I don't think even then it's going to be that particularly amazing unless you have a very specific combination of cards that you can play. So long story short, a 2-color format quite decisively, with 2-color decks being both most popular and also the ones that win the most. In terms of popularity of color pairs, Azorius, Izzet, and Boros by quite a lot, the 3 most popular color pairs. Azorius 16.6%, Izzet 15.7%, Boros 14.5. That's taking all 5 days into account. Then we have a slight drop, and 12% of the people drafted Gruul. Then we have Orzhov, Demir. These are all below 10%, and 10% is what you would expect in a perfectly balanced format. Orzhov is 9.5, and Demir is 8.5. And then we have Rakdos and Golgari, roughly 7% of decks were those. And then Selesnya and Simic, around 5% of decks were, of two-color decks were those. Because here I'm only looking at two-color decks. Then, in terms of power, the average win rate for two-color decks was 56.5, so slightly higher than for all the decks, because all the other decks don't win that much. And here I also kept the orders from the most popular to the least popular colors. And as you can see, the first 4 decks that are having all over average win rate, so Azorius, Izzet, Boros, and Gruul, are also the 4 most popular drafted. Selesnya is still in top 4 and still above average in terms of the win rate. And despite that, it's still drafted way less than Orzhov, for example, is. And all the other 5 color combinations are roughly at the same level of the win rate, between like 53.5 and 54 percentage points. So within really 0.5 percentage points of each other, we have Orzhov, Demir, Rakdos, Golgari, and Simic. And when you look at it slightly differently, we have the Jeskai color combinations. So Azorius, Izzet, and Boros. These are centered around artifacts, and these are the ones that win the most. And then we have the 3 Naya color pairs, Boros, Gruul, and Selesnya. And they win slightly less than the Azorius and Izzet, but still above average. And these are sort of centered around aggro with different flavors of that aggro. So Boros is more like artifact aggro. Selesnya is more like generic good cards aggro, and Gruul is more focused on the dinosaurs, but it's still an aggro deck. And all the decks that do pretty badly are the sacrifice, graveyard kind of themes. They are not doing so well. In terms of the color evaluation, I always go first about colors for a while, just to see what is having the highest win rate, which cards are the bombs, which cards are the best commons and uncommons in each color. And here, for bombs, I picked that these are the cards that have roughly above 65% game and hand win rate. Roughly. I did some loose exceptions when it was like 64.8 or something. In white, the bombs are Unstable Glyph Bridge, the 5-mana artifact that wraths the board, except for creature. Well, you choose 2 creatures, go 1 creature per player with power 2 or less, and they are spared from the wrath. And then you can craft it to flip it into a 5/3 with a 5/3 flyer with a very annoying ability that you can or cast spells or attack on your turn if you're playing against it. So you have to choose if you want to put pressure on your opponent or cast spells and promote your board state. You cannot do both at the same time, which is a painful choice to make. The card is very strong. It's not like Sunfall level power Wrath, but it's not very far off, honestly. It's I played with it recently, and it was just so great sometimes. Plus, you can get like some mini combos with it. You can set it up. If you're playing against dinos, very often you will just like Wrath the whole board, which is really nice. You can even play a combat trick on your opponent's creature to make sure that they don't keep anything if you are that much interested in wiping the whole board. If they have multiple 1/1s, you can choose which one you want to keep. So you're not going to be, they will not be able to choose their, I don't know, a 2/2 Ramaging artifact red creature because they want to keep it. You'll be forced them to keep a gnome or something like that. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, great card. Obviously good. Sanguine Evangelist is the other bomb. That's the 3-mana 2/1 with Battle Cry, and enters the battlefield or dies. You create a 1/1 bat creature token with flying. I mean, it puts so many bodies on the board. The Battle Cry is cute. 3 mana is very, very well priced for that kind of an effect. So yeah, great card. And last we have a Warden of the Inner Sky. That's a 1-mana 1/2, and you can tap free creatures or artifacts you control to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And you scribe. You can activate the sorcery, and when it has 3 or more counters on it, it has flying and vigilance. I played with this card as well. It's really great. You can easily get counters on it just through tapping things most of the time in those white decks, because you will have so many spare artifacts lying around, maybe some gnomes or something. And then sometimes you just put counters in different ways, by cracking a map and putting a counter on them, or by playing the 2-mana 1/2 that puts a counter on something. So you can really quickly get it into a 4/5 vigilant flyer, which is a great creature that can still grow when you tap something. So yeah, great. In terms of the top commons, we have Altec Cloudguard as the top common. That's the 4-mana 3/2 flyer that makes a 1/1. Shockingly to no one, putting 2 bodies for the price of 1 card, one of them aggressive, one of them that can jump, is still good. Nothing changed. 3/2 flyer is actually quite good. It plays very well in the blue-white and the red-white decks. I'm sure it also plays great in the green-white because the card is good on raid. Number 2 white common is Miner's Guidewing, 1 mana for a 1/1 flying vigilance, and when it dies, target creature you control explores. So if you play it on turn 1 and it doesn't die, and you play a 2-drop, you feel really good about it. You can attack, and tap it to some effect. You can attack and then chump block it later. Just a great little creature all around. And number 3 of the top commons, and I'm really happy to say that finally it seems that at least the pacifism variant for the set is playable, and actually maybe even good. Not like amazing, but good. It makes top 3 commons in its colors, and we've seen so many of those pacifism effects that just were pretty bad in the format. So happy to see that this one is doing okay. In terms of uncommons, we have a 1-drop as the top uncommon, Ruined Lurker Bat, 1 white, for a flying lifelink 1/1 creature at the beginning of your end step. If you descended this turn, scry 1. It's a great ability. From my perspective, it doesn't work in paper at all because I always forgot to scry. So whenever you play this card in paper, just think about those scries when you ramage a card or when you loot a card or something like that. I forgot so many times. It was frustrating. But yeah, 1 mana, 1/1 flying lifelink with an extra upside, just a great card. Then we have a 2-drop, Spring-Loaded Soul Blades. That's a 2-mana artifact that deals 5 damage to target top creature and can flip into a 5/5 crew 1 vehicle that also can be crewed by tapping 2 artifacts that are not even creatures. Great card. And also keep in mind, this card is more frequent than all the other uncommons. All the double-sided uncommons are slightly more frequent than other uncommons by roughly 20%. So white not only gets those top 2 of those double-sided uncommons and top uncommons, they will be more frequent than the regular ones. Because number 3 uncommon is the Clay-Fired Bricks. 2 mana to get a plains, gain 2 life, but you can flip with your 7 and you get 2 1/1 gnomes and an anthem for your team. So the gnomes will practically be 2/2s. So yeah, all those cards really great. White is in general great. I had so much fun playing it. There's a bunch of other really good cards. Interesting to note that I think that in top 5 white uncommons, there's only 1-drops and 2-drops. How those cheap effects have been defining this format is just incredible. In terms of blue, there's only 1 bomb, Kites of Larcenist, 3 mana, 3/2 flying ward 1. And when it ETBs, you can turn a permanent from each player into a treasure, and it remains the treasure until this thing dies. It has really strong, a high win rate. Most of the time, you just play it and you turn the best creature that the opponent has into a treasure. Sometimes you have something, I don't know, lying around that you don't care about, and you may turn it into a treasure so that you can sacrifice it to something, because there's, I don't know, a creature you cannot use. I don't want to imagine which kind of theoretical scenarios you can do, or maybe you really want to ramp yourself, or maybe really only changing something into a treasure will allow you to survive till the next turn, something like that. It can happen. But most of the time, you just change the opponent's thing into a treasure. Still very good. Good body. Ward 1 is amazing on it. 3 mana 2/3 flyer is okay. Give it ward and give it the ability to kill one of their creatures, even if it's just temporary. It's going to be great. Schooner was just below that threshold that I set for myself, the 65. It was, I think, at 63% when I was checking the data. That's why it's not on the list. But it was definitely it's still a very strong card. It just didn't pass the threshold that I had. Top commons, we have Waterwind Scout. Card is just really, really good. Best common of the set so far in terms of the data. It's 3 mana, 2/2 flyer. When it ETBs, you create a map token. And you may think that those map tokens are just like worse than explore, because you need to pay mana later to explore. But often they're just so much better than exploring. Getting that extra piece of cardboard to tap into some abilities is so good. The fact that you can allocate it whenever, or not whenever, but because it's sorcerer speed, but whenever you can allocate it on some other target is just great, because you can put that counter on some double striker or another flyer, even another Waterwing Scout, because you want to make it a 4/4 to get away from Abrade range or something. It's just the flexibility of that is worth that 1 mana, and so often I'm just happy to get that map, because I want to craft something with it, because the entering of the artifact trigger the ability of my 3/3 wall to attack this particular turn. There's just so many little things that little map treasure does, that it compensates with extras for the fact that it costs 1 mana more. Then number 2 blue common is Cogwork Wrestler. That card definitely overperformed for me. I thought that because there's not so many X1s in the set, that it's going to be not so great. I just didn't appreciate just how good in combat this thing is when most of your combat is between very small creatures. Because all those Jeskai decks are going to have relatively small creatures, so Cogwork Wrestler, every single combat is just changing the math completely and leading to big blowouts. And so many times it happened to me that, I don't know, opponent is attacking me with like a 2/2 double striker, and I play the Wrestler, and it brings that 1 extra power that I could have to kill that 2/2, and now the 2/2 is a 0/2, so I can block it on 3 creatures, including the Wrestler, and kill it. Just works so great. And number 3, we have Oaken Siren, 2 mana, 1/2, flying vigilance, and you can tap it to give blue mana, but you can only spend it to play artifact spells or activate artifact abilities. Still great body, because there's so many 1/1 flyers in other colors. The 1/2 flyer with vigilance is just stopping the offensive of the opponent quite frequently, and then putting a counter on it just makes it great. Being able to ramp out some more expensive artifacts, that's also great. So good all-rounder, and the being artifact is actually enabling some synergies, like really strong card. In terms of the top blue uncommons, we have 2 of the most oppressive uncommons in the set. One is Zoetic Glyph, that's 3 mana aura. You can enchant artifact with it, and that artifact becomes a 5/4 golem. That's basically it. And when it's put into graveyard from the battlefield, you discover 3. So it basically replaces Ish itself. You get like a 2-drop out of it. So let me put it like that. It's a 3 mana for a most likely a 5/4 haste. And when that 5/4 haste dies, you get probably a 2-drop or a 1-drop or even a 3-drop if you're lucky. So you can get quite a lot of mana discount on the original investment. Now, there are some combos with this card as well. With the new Goldwind pick, whatever it's called, Diamond pick or something, that's indestructible. So you can cast it on that, and then you get your 5/4 indestructible creature, which can be quite oppressive early in the game. That's really a lot. It's got like 65% win rate. That's almost at the level of the bombs. So actually, if we go to the blue bombs, Zoetic Glyph should be in it. That's how good the card is. Then we have Spiteless Siren, 1 mana, 1/1 flying that makes a map token. Same thing that applied to Waterwing Scout, applied to Spiteless Siren. This card is even better. I always have this kind of, when my opponent starts with Island Siren, and it can lead. This is the only card that can enable turn 3 4/4 Angel in white-blue deck, if you're lucky enough. So that's great. And then third uncommon, Staunch Crewmate, 2 mana, 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you can reveal Artifact or Pirate. And this card has so many good targets and those decks are so stacked on artifacts and pirates. I'm talking mainly about the blue-white and blue-red. That, like 95% of the time, this is a 2 mana, 2/1 that draws you a card, which is a great rate on that. Okay, Black Bombs. Alka-Seltzer, The Deepest Betrayal. That's the only one that made it to the bomb status, but it's some bomb. I never could beat that card when opponents played it so far. 5 mana for life flinker with flying, and it just poses your hand randomly when it attacks, and then makes more 1/1 flyers to chump in case 4 life cushion was not enough. And it's hard to kill because it just flips back very, very easily. So yeah, great bomb. In terms of the black commons, here we have an interesting collection. All of them are spells. Tithing Blade is an artifact that makes an edict, and it can flip into a sort of enchantment that drains opponent for 1 each upkeep. Quite surprising, but all those cards are close to each other, so it's hard to say that this is like the best black uncommon. It's relatively in the cloud of cards that do similar things. Join the Dead in number 2. That's an instant for 3 mana that gives target creature -5/-5, or if you have Descent, -10/-10, which kills everything except for Galta in this format. Although, I was amazed by how frequently I managed to get creatures that are bigger than 10/10 in this format because of some interactions, enchantments, auras, equipments, and stuff like that. So, you might... It's not a universal removal, it's almost universal when you get Descent. And the third is Fanatical Offering, 2 mana to sack artifact or creature, and then you draw 2 cards and make a map token. It's very important, I think. I think that those white-black decks we will discover later in the format, they are all reliant on having this and the new version of Ichor Wellspring. So they will basically kill not only by sacrificing, but also by drawing copious amounts of cards and swarming the opponent through that. Top black uncommons, and black is not having that great of a win rate, but definitely the 2 first uncommons are amazing. Deep Cavern Bat, looking at the numbers, is a card that really pulls the color. It's a 2 mana 1/1 flying lifelinker. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the opponent's hand, so that's the first thing that is nice. You have quite a lot of information, and you may exile a non-land card from it until this thing leaves battlefield. The thing, of course, is that in a set with removal not being super abundant, it's really hard to excuse using a removal on this 1/1 flying lifelinker, which is a great strength of that card, that it stays on board for a long time. I've had those games when I just played the bat on turn 2 and it survived till the end of the game, because I'm playing against someone who's not black deck, so they don't have dead weights and they don't want to spend 3 mana to kill the bat and get something back. And then I put bigger threats that they need to deal with, and all of a sudden the bat is surviving, which is great. And Chupacabra Echo, that's a 4 mana 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -X/-X, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. Again, great, and if you can boost it a bit, it's even better. And a 3 is surprising a bit. We have Defossilize, that's the reanimate version for the set, 5 mana to reanimate, and then you explore twice also on top of everything. I played this card, it's really solid, especially when you can enable it with maybe some land cycling or just by playing big things. I actually played it in the dinosaur deck when I splashed this, because I had very easy splashes in that deck. Red bombs, we have the Dracosaur. I think that every one of us lost to it at least once by now. Card is just insane. That's a 5 mana, 5/5 flying first striker. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this particular turn. If you exile the land, you get a 3/3 dinosaur. If you exile the non-land, this way you will create a treasure token. So lots of turns, you'll get both of those things. So yeah. Just so hard to beat if you don't kill it on side. And this card has absolutely outrageous win rate. Then we have Magmatic Galleon, 5 mana vehicle. It deals 5 to any target on ETB and makes a treasure if that excess damage has been dealt to that thing. And it then has crew 2 and is a 5/5 galleon, which is great, which is absolutely great. Fine, especially that on a thing that is a removal that normally costs 5 without giving you the vehicle, and you can see that in the win rate. It's over 65%. So yeah, really good. And then we have Breach's Eager Pillager, 2 and red for a Goblin Pirate. It's a 3/3 first striker, and when you attack with when the pirate you control attacks, you can choose one that has been chosen this turn. You create a treasure, or you create target creature cannot block, or exile the top card of your library, and you may play it this turn. So if you have 3 pirates you attack with it, you get all 3 of those things. It's just a very strong card, a very strong raid. Top commons, and that was the biggest surprise, that the top common as per win rate was Atali's Favor. I don't know if it's still true today, but yesterday when I made the presentation it was. Pretty close to other ones, but behind it we have Goblin Tomb Raider, which is a 1 mana 1/2, and it has +1/+0 and haste if you control an artifact, so frequently it will be a 2/2 haster. And third, I was expecting this card to be number 1, obviously, as almost everyone did, is a Braid, 2 mana to deal 3 damage or destroy target artifact. And people don't destroy artifact frequently enough, from what I've seen in games from my opponents and from some games that were against the streamers. Make sure not to forget that the destroy artifact thing is actually a good option. Uncommons, Geological Appraiser, the 4 mana 3/2 Discover 3 card is the best red uncommon in terms of win rate. Then we have the Belligerent Yearling, the 2 mana 3/2 Trample Dinosaur that its power grows when another big dinosaur enters the battlefield. And Dreadmaw's Ire is a red for an instant. Target attacking creature gets +2/+2 and gains trample. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact that player controls. This thing is really good. But I would draw your attention to the fact that people usually telegraph having it quite a lot. They frequently will make a weird attack, like with the 2/2, because you have some really strong artifact, and then maybe you can do some blocks that will either force them to play it in such a way that the no trampling damage will be dealt, and you'll save your artifacts, or yeah, that's I think one of the better ways. If you feel that they might have the Dreadmaw's Ire because of the play pattern that is a bit strange, I would say forcing them to use it without killing the artifact is a great strategy, and they might be quite surprised when you all of a sudden triple block something when you didn't have to. So yeah, be attentive to observing it. Green bombs. We have Sentinel of the Nameless City. That's a 3 mana 3/4 with vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you make a map token. That thing gets out of control quite quickly. Making a map every turn is just really good. And then the second one, we have Huatli, Poet of Unity. That's 2 and a green for a 2/3. And when it ETBs, you search for a basic land, you put it in your hand, and you can flip it into a saga that does dinosaurs, searches for dinosaurs, and gives dinosaurs trample and double strike for some reason. It's really strong. Top commons in green, Staggering Size is number 1. That, again, as I was saying at the beginning of the stream, is probably driven by really good players playing it more frequently than lower win rate players. Then number 2, we have Pathfinding Axejaw, 4 mana 4/3 with Explore Dinosaur. Really strong, solid, nothing to be thrilled about, but does its job. And then we have Poison Dart Frog in number 3. That's, yeah, again, I have to admit I was not high on it at the beginning of the format because I didn't believe in the 5-color deck. And while I might be right about the 5-color deck to some extent, Poison Dart Frog is still a good card. It's number 3 in green. Arguably not the strongest color, but also not the weakest in terms of win rate. And now I see that there are decks that really want to play Poison Dart. We're going to talk about it in a second. In terms of green uncommons, number 1 is the Cenotes Scout. That's a green for a 1/1, and it explores. So frequently it's going to be a 1 mana 2/2, and sometimes it's going to be a 1 mana 1/1 that draws you a land. Then Trashing Brontozon, still game. After all these years, it's still a card that deserves respect. So it was not power crept just yet. Trashy B is still alive and well. I played 2 of those yesterday, and it felt good. So many times. Obviously, Trashy B is 1 green for a 3/4 dinosaur, and you can sacrifice it for 1 mana to destroy target artifact or enchantment, which sometimes you will do in this format in dinosaur decks, because sometimes it's just worth to sacrifice one of your medium-sized creatures in order to kill an oppressive artifact. And Upside Down Right says that 4 creatures are at premium, and I so agree with that. It's so hard to get through that Trashing Brontodon. I so often played it, and just like opponent cannot do anything. And the last uncommon is Malamet Battlecliff. That's a green for sorcery, target creature you control, and choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If the creature you control ETB'd on this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then those creatures fight each other. So sort of like a fight variant, but if you play it on the creature that you just played, you add extra mana on it, sort of kicker to give it +1/+1 permanently and make it fight something. So yeah, pretty neat removal spell with a decent win rate. And that concludes the green. Now we can move to the second part of the stream. And I'm going to talk about each color pair. And I'm going to do it in a particular way. So I'm going to talk about best common in each color combination, the hidden gem, which is a card that I sort of half objectively, half subjectively selected from the group. Sometimes it's going to be the card that were surprising. Sometimes it's going to be the card that are played very little, so maybe people should pay more attention to them. That doesn't mean that they're great, but because some small sample size, of course, can distort things. But at least it's a good indicator that they might be interesting. And 1 card is going to be a trap. And I'm going to look through the commons and uncommons for each color combination. And starting with white-blue. Best common, Waterwind Scout at 63.3% game in hand win rate. Just great. As I said, it's best blue common. It's the best common in the format. There's no surprise in that. Hidden gem, I picked the Inverted Iceberg, partially because I'm actually surprised. I didn't put too much stock in this card. I thought it would be pretty bad, but it still has a really high 61.2% game in hand win rate. Turns out that it's going to be good, and I'm just not sure yet because the data cannot tell us at the moment if it's because it's good in those more controlling versions of blue-white decks, or is it because it's also good in those aggressive versions of the deck? The flip on the 6/6 is pretty good, yeah, and I think that the ability of tapping something or untapping something allows you to play it so that you can attack when you are on the defensive and untap it, and if you're aggressive, you can make sure that the opponent cannot block favorably and things like that. So yeah. 10 Glorifier of Suffering is a trap. It only has 54.7% win rate, which, you know, is not terrible, but it's terrible for this color combination. It's the best color combination in the format. It just doesn't do what the deck wants to be done. And actually, this card has been sort of close to being a trap in most color combinations, which should make you think about it. Key uncommons, best uncommon, Zoetic Glyph. No surprises there. 65.9% win rate. This is insane for this like bomb status. That card is just so good. You have so many map tokens lying around. You have so many things that can easily become a hasty creature. And the fact that even if they kill it, they are never ahead of anything because you just discover 3 and get something on board is just so good. It actually is pretty cute that the counter in this format costs 4 mana, so you cannot discover it that easily. And you can still cast it for 2, which is nice. Staunch Crewmate. That's the hidden gem because that card is still not picked super highly, but 64% win rate is impressive. Even though technically the pirate archetype should be, it's still great in Azorius. So maybe that's why it's picked as a hidden gem. It's sort of like non-obvious that this card should also be great in white-blue. But best pirates are blue pirates in the set so far. And this deck still plays quite a lot of artifacts, so you still have enough targets for it to be useful. In terms of it's a trap, I picked Mischievous Pup. I was high on this card before the set was released, but it shows pretty poor numbers in any deck that you play. I think that it's just not worth the squeeze because you don't have that juicy targets for for the removal. Therefore, they are not worth paying 3 mana to save them for a body that dies to a random gnome. I think that the 1 toughness on it is just. Yeah, I mean, you have a couple of cards that are worth picking up, like the Soul Blades or Lodestone Needle, as the chat suggests, but they're just not happening frequently enough. So yeah, Pup is slightly disappointing, at least in the beginning. And yeah, blue-white, before we go into the white-black, blue-white seems to be 2 decks. There is the blue-white that is sort of aggro tempo, which wants to start turn 1 Siren, turn 2 something with flying, hopefully, or some kind of evasive creature. Into turn 3, another flyer, and maybe turn 4, Oltec Cloud Guard, and then turn 5, bounce something, and you end the game like this. But there is also like a slower, grindier, more controlling deck based on craft, based on the murals. Again, mural, it's the only signpost uncommon that is at higher frequency because that's the only 2-faced signpost uncommon. So there's 20% more of mural than any other signpost. And then you want to play your, clay-fired bricks and things like that, and maybe like even some Cosmoblast or something to make you survive just killing stuff. And this deck also does exist. This is the kind of a deck that you want to have Abuelo, who is going to generate like lots of value by blinking your things and stuff like that. So yeah. 2 versions of blue-white, possibly even more, but these are the ones I was thinking based on those numbers that do exist so far. White-black. Now, this is one of the decks that has the lowest win rate, if not even the lowest win rate in the data. Still, Oltec Cloud Guard has a decent win rate of 58.5. So if you're playing white-black, you probably want to have at least a couple of those. And then Hidden Gem I selected is actually number 2 on the list of the top commons for that color, is Another Chance. It's a 2 and a black for an instant. You mill 2 cards, then you return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. I think that this is a very important thing to keep about when you want to build a successful white-black. So far, the data is suggesting that card draw is actually absolutely important for that kind of deck. It's not your Bartolomeos, who actually have a pretty low win rate at the signpost. It's actually playing decent creatures on rate, hopefully as many of them being 2-for-1s, and at the same time, you want to play your draw 2 cards and make a map, your artifact that you can sacrifice to draw another card and draws a card on ETB. And Another Chance is a big part of that deal. So you want to make your 2-for-1s, you want to trade them, and then once you trade them, you rebuy them with Another Chance, and you just completely forget the Bartolomeo de Presidios theme of sacrificing creatures. Because Bartolomeo is a problematic card in it that you need to sacrifice board presence to make it tall, while other people that are playing successful decks are going wide and low, which means that you have this 9/8 that they just block with a gnome and they swing you with 4 other creatures that you cannot block because you sacrifice all the stuff to make Bartolomeo big. So there is a conflict between it, and that's why it seems to me the card doesn't work. And once it becomes a problem, usually opponent will find a way of dealing with it, bounce it or something like that, and you are left like a buffoon with that big creature. So I mean, I would still probably play it in my white-black decks, but I would definitely start thinking about it as more like a grindy value kind of deck that draws a lot of cards, and then small creatures do quite a lot. You play your marionettes, you play your snails, you play maybe some shenanigans with those, and then you return them, and then you replay them, and all of a sudden you outgrind your opponent on the value through those kind of small kind of creatures. The trap that I see in this format in terms of the win rate, Brood Rage Mycoid was hitting me on the eye the most, because that card is picked relatively highly. I'm not saying that like super high pick, but it's picked relatively highly, but it had only 49% win rate. Like the win rate was definitely way below where it was picked. So that pick this card as a trap. And again, this is a thing that you will not be guaranteed to trigger it most of the games. Those tokens are pretty bad in this format. There's ones that cannot block, unlike gnomes that just are just strictly better because they're artifacts that can block and whatnot. So the card is slightly underwhelming. MTG rating tester thinks that the card would be too strong if the tokens could block. I honestly don't know, you know? It would be worth trying. And black needs some commons that are good. I don't think it would be broken if they could block. The problem of that card is not that it makes tokens. The problem is that you cannot reliably activate this descent ability. That's the problem that it has. Now, anyway. In terms of key uncommons, Deep Cavern Bat, 62% win rate, just head and shoulders above everything. And then you had a bunch of cards that are quite obvious that they are going to be good in terms of uncommons. So like all the blue and white, all the black and white good uncommons are there on the list somewhere. So they were not really like hidden gems for me. I had to go slightly deeper into the win rate tables for the white-black to find one. And I think Synapse Necromage, the 2 and a black fungus wizard, 3/1. When it dies, create 2/1/1 black fungus creature tokens that cannot block. This has 57.4 win rate, which is decent. It's not like amazing, but it's decent. And it's still picked-ish, late-ish, not super late, but late-ish. So I thought that maybe people should draw more attention. I also love the art for that somehow. And the trap that I selected, and I don't know if this is going to revert to the mean, maybe it was just an artifact of the early data, but I was quite surprised to see Bitter Triumph, the premium removal for the set, 1 and a black for an instant, as an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card or pay 3 life, and you destroy target creature or planeswalker. That one had only 54.6% win rate, which was surprising. But again, this is early data, so card is strong in other archetypes, so clearly it's not a weak card. And I think I would at least watch it for the next couple of next week or so and see if it bounces back in white-black, or is it actually bad there because of some intrinsic reasons why it will be bad there, because it's got good numbers in other combination of colors. So I don't know if it's specifically bad in white-black, or is it just variance. Okay, white-red. The key commons, Altec Cloudguard is the best white common, and therefore probably the best common in this particular deck. 60.5% win rate. Again, obviously a great card. Hidden gem I selected, and this is based on minute sample size, but I think there is a very good rationale on playing that card, is Acrobatic Leap. White for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying until end of turn. Untap it. So many games are decided by those small ball attacks by 1/2 vigilant flying creature, 2/2 flyer, 3/3 flyer, or something. Being able to blow the opponent out of the water with Acrobatic Leap and give like a 3/3 creature flying and then block their 3/3 flyer will be game swinging. So even though it has a small sample size, even though its win rate is like 58.7, pretty decent, I would at least ask you to think about that card and maybe try to include it in your decks next time and see how is it going to be working. In terms of a trap, Adaptive Gem Guard has a pretty low win rate, 54.3. It's a 3 and a white artifact creature gnome, 3/3, but you can tap 2 untapped creatures and artifacts to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Initially, this card looks slightly better, but the numbers don't confirm it. I think that there will be definitely games where that card is good. 54 is not a terrible win rate, so card is playable. But I think that it has the main mechanic of the color combination. People will think, oh, this belongs in this deck. It doesn't always belong in this deck, and there are games where it just performs quite poorly, because it's easier to remove. There is already bunch of good 4-drops in those colors that I would rather play over Adaptive Gem Guard. So I'm going to put it, but only if I have a very, very specific build of this, or if I don't have 4-drops and I need to put something bigger in my deck, and I have like maybe mediocre build for Adaptive Gem Guard. But 54.3 is just low for white-red. Uncommons, spring-loaded saw blades. Saw blades is number 1. That's got 61.1% win rate. It's a great card. Kill something. In white-red, you should be able to crew the resulting vehicle without tapping creatures, which is great. It also will be quite easy to craft because you will have so many artifacts in this particular archetype, so it should be easy. Yeah, great card. Hidden gem, I picked Diamond Pickaxe. Its 60% win rate is really high, and the card still goes quite late. I had a couple of pickaxe decks in white-red, and these are the ones that really benefit from having the 1/3 that taps to permanence to ping opponent, because pickaxe can quickly go out of proportion and generate like 3-4 treasure tokens. You don't sacrifice those, you tap them for abilities, and you deal some damage early because you're aggressive, and then from that time you just start jamming with the pickaxe and tapping things and ping opponent down to 0 in several turns. Of course, as every equipment, pickaxe is great for tapping itself for those effects, because it doesn't matter if it's tapped or untapped, it still works as an equipment. And the trap, pickaxe is a great treasure generator. Enterprising Scollywog is not. 1 in red for a 2/2 at the beginning of your end step. If you descended this turn, create a treasure token. It just doesn't happen enough in the white-red deck. So even though it's a 2-mana 2/2, which you sometimes, according to some people, have to put in your deck, that doesn't mean that you should put Enterprising Scollywog. There is also so many better 2-drops. It is a red-black card, but it's still picked quite highly. And I think that it might appeal that it makes multiple artifacts to people that want to play those top 2 things. It's been played quite a lot in the format, just doesn't have very good results. White-green. The surprise color. The one that was winning after day 1. And is still quite a high win rate color. And let's look at the key commons. The best common at 61.1, which is a really high win rate, is Staggering Size. And this is the removal for white-green, I think. You want to be attacking. You want to be creating pressure on your opponent. And if you create pressure, then you will force them to block. Once you force them to block, Staggering Size is going to turn your creature into removal. And because it gives trample, you don't mind, because any excess is going to be still dealt to the opponent, so it helps you attack through things. So yeah, great kind of common. Probably want to play 2 copies or 3 copies even into your white-green decks. Hidden Gem, 59.3. Again, a very high win rate for that deck. Is the Construction Hammer. White for an equipment, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has 3 tap, sacrifice the hammer, destroy target artifact or enchantment, it got equip 1. It plays to the theme of the color, which is having a bit more power than the base power, but I think it just generally upgrades your creatures, and you want to play decent-sized creatures in this archetype, and making your decent-sized creatures slightly bigger. You know, your 3/3 becomes a 4/4. 4/4 is so much bigger than a 3/3 in this format, and you know, randomly you'll host those very powerful artifacts on the opponent's side. Just is a good package for this particular deck. So yeah, it looks pretty solid. In terms of trap, Nurturing Bristleback, 7 mana 5/5 that enters the battlefield with another 3/3 and has a forest cycling. I think that in white-green you're neither interested in playing a 7-drop, nor you're interested in cycling for a forest. So just doesn't do it for this deck. Key uncommons, Ruin Lurker bot, the 1 mana flying life linker, that's still good, 63.7%. It's great. Hidden Gem, I selected Kutsil Malamet Exemplar because there are not so many signposts that are on my list this set. And the fact that Kutsil is actually doing well is a good news for green white. This is your reward for picking that experimental lane. How I would see getting on white green is you start drafting white, but red and blue seem to be cut, but you already have a bunch of good white cards, and then you see like a Kutsil, then you start seeing like late staggering sizes, some green bangers like, I don't know, the 4 mana exploring dinosaurs, maybe some uncommons, maybe like a Trashy Bee or things like that. And you sort of naturally ease in. It's not a deck that I would be expecting to force in any way. I would expect it to be, I tried to draft white, and white was open, but I couldn't pair it with anything, and green seemed open, and I end up in the green-white. So yeah. Interestingly, the trap that I see in this is Guardian of the Great Door, 54.6, and it has decent win rate in other color combinations. That's the white angel, 4/4 angel. As an additional cost of it, you need to tap up to 4 untapped artifacts, creatures, or lands you control. And I think that this deck doesn't generate that amount of cardboard. Also, it pushes aggressive damage and forces trade, which means the board is trying to be kept to like smallish size. And because of that, you will just be casting it a lot of the time as a 5 mana 4/4 flyer, maybe 4, which is and that's still not a guarantee. And I'm pretty sure you're gonna do a lot of the casting it as a 6 mana 4/4 flyer. This is just not good enough nowadays. So the fact that you will sometimes get this situation, it's going to be problematic. So a slight trap. Blue-black. And key commons, Tithing Blade came up on top of all the commons at 58.1. That's the 2 mana edict effect that you can craft to make it into ill-gotten gains, whatever the thing that drains opponent for 1 every single turn. 58.1, important. It's a cheap removal, and cheap removal is important in this set because you're going to play against cheap creatures. So even though it doesn't target, even though frequently it will just ping a gnome, at least you only pay 2 mana for it. And then later you can turn it into a drain machine, which hopefully will keep you alive for long enough to dominate the game and win it. Hidden gem I selected is the Sage of Days, the 2 and a blue 3/2 human wizard. When it ETBs, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top of your library and put the rest into your graveyard. So interesting take on Organ Hoarder. This is the Organ Hoarder that doesn't draw you cards, but just keeps it on the top of the library, and the rest goes into the rest of it goes to the graveyard. It's good because it triggers the descent. It makes sure that you get your descent closer to what you need to do. 56% is good for blue-black because blue-black's average win rate is 53. So it is performing over average. We're looking for the cards that will be good in that particular deck. That's responding to the questions in chat. What makes 56% win rate good in this? It's just like higher than the average, which means that this is the thing that will make your blue-black decks better. I think that, the white-red, white-blue are relatively easy to figure out how to build them. But blue-black is going to be much harder. So we need to think about which cards fit into it and which cards are not. Because I'm pretty sure that Dimir especially can have a much higher win rate. We just need to figure out better how to build them. There needs to be innovation, and they will always have a slightly lower win rate because they are harder to play. They present players with more decisions that they need to make. So knowing this, I think you can have really strong blue-black decks. And in order to have them, you better focus on which cards are good in the data that we have, knowing that, for example, our Dimir decks are going to be played slightly badly in the first days and not built optimally. So I put quite a lot of weight on seeing that the Sage of Days is one of the top commons in those blue-black decks, and is also going late in the draft, which means I will have access to it if I'm planning to draft the blue-black. Anyway, trap, I selected the Deep Goblin Skull Taker, picked too high, I think, for what the card is. That's the 2 and a black Goblin Warrior. It's a 2/2 with Menace, and at the end of your step, and at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. I really don't like those type of cards, and luckily for me, the numbers have been confirming what I think about it. It's 52.7% win rate. They are always good because if you are an assertive deck, you are on the play, you're going to be attacking, you're going to force your opponent to blocks, and they will have to play their creatures. So interactions wouldn't have helped them, and they have to keep up with playing creatures against you. That's why those tricks are so good. Because in order to survive, your opponent must play those 3-drops. And if they play 3-drops, they tap out, so they had interaction, it wouldn't help them at all. And actually, most of the time you want to play your interaction in such a way that they cannot blow you out, because that's a tragedy if that happens. So you don't want to play into the open mana too much unless you're really desperate. For the uncommons, Zoetic Glyph, again, top uncommon in blue. Shocking. Every blue deck, I think, has Zoetic Glyph as the best uncommon. So if you have one thing that you want to memorize from this seminar, you definitely want to memorize that Zoetic Glyph is a bomb, basically. 63.2% win rate, which is, again, great for this particular archetype with a 53% average win rate. For the hidden gem, I selected Scampering Surveyor. This card goes slightly late. It's a 4-mana 3/2 that puts a basic or a cave onto the battlefield tapped when it ETBs. It's got 59.5% win rate, which was surprising to me. I guess you can get like a decent cave, or you can get ramp to 6 mana quickly, and you can play your land cycler then. But yeah, very good numbers for the card. So don't sleep on it. And for a trap, I selected Waterlogged Hulk, which hurts me personally because I was pretty high on that card in the previous season. I still will try to make it work, but so far I never drafted it even, I think. I was focused on more of the tempo and aggro strategies. I think the time for figuring out Waterlogged Hulk will come, and my gem count will feel it painfully. But yeah, 51.7% win rate just doesn't do enough, it seems. Blue-red. The key commons, Waterwind Scout, just because it's a very strong card, 61.1% win rate here. Hidden gem, I selected Unlucky Drop. This card seems to... Sebadaya, GIH, stands for game in hand. It's only calculating the win rate of when you had this card in the hand. And the advantage of that are several. If the card is only in your deck, if you count the win rate of when the card was in your deck, you will draw the card only like 40 to 50% of the time. So half of the data about when your card was in your deck and you won does not even contain games when you drew that particular card. So it's not very informative about the card. It's more informative about which decks is the card in. And then you can also calculate the win rate when you cast a certain card. But there's a problem with that. Of course, when you cast an 11 mana spell that says I win the game, you're going to probably have 100% win rate. The problem with that card is that many games you're not being able to cast it, and you started with some sort of like mulligan. Instead of that, you calculate the win rate when the card was in your hand, because then it had the impact on the game, either because it was cast at some stage or because it wasn't cast and it had a negative impact on the outcome of the game because you had a dead card in your hand. Yep. So that's why you use the game in hand win rate whenever the card was in the hand at some stage of the game. Okay. Unlucky Drop is the hidden gem. 60% win rate in blue-red. Again, I did not see that this card is going to be good in this format. I was wrong. It's not busted, but it's really solid. And I played it in my decks, and I was really happy with that. Because it's an instant interaction. It does quite a lot. It's actually sneaky good against cheap creatures, because when you cast it on a cheap creature, opponent will have to think hard whether they're going to top or bottom it. If they bottom it, you basically had a kill spell. So you get a hard removal in blue, which is something neat to have. And if they decide to put it on top, well, they will play a low impact creature late in the game. Unfortunately, those low impact creatures are quite good in this set, but still, they will waste their draw step to get a 1/1 flyer or something like that. And very often, it's going to be worth casting on that 1/1 flyer, because that one flyer has like 2+1/+1 counters on it from somewhere. So you actually are gaining on that, because it's not a one drop that you're returning, it's a one drop that has been enhanced by multiple effects. Okay, and the trap, Seismic Monstrosaur, 4 red for a dinosaur. It has trample, it's a 6/5. You can sacrifice a land to draw a card, and it has mountain cycling at 51.9. That's really low for this archetype. You should avoid it, and people pick it relatively highly. Key uncommons in blue-red. Would you be shocked that Zoetic Glyph is number 1? No, but the number that it provides is absolutely shocking. 67.4% game and hand win rate. This is something like top bombs, like Luminarch Aspirant, that kind of level. This is the Fable of the Mirror Breaker kind of win rate level. This is shocking how good it is in this blue-red archetype. And I think that at least part of it is that it's being matched up with the pick, which has Indestructible. So you can have on turn 3 hasty 5/4 Indestructible. Now, how you're going to win the game against something like that, I don't know, but not in many color combinations. Hidden gem I selected. It's not like super hidden, but it's still going slightly later in the draft. A Lodestone Needle, 2-mana artifact with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you tap a target artifact or creature, and you put 2 stun counters on it. So you take something out of commission for several turns. Great in your tempo deck, because you are attacking while you're doing that. So taking out of commission some really annoying blocker, like, I don't know, the Death Thatcher or a 3/4 that would be problematic otherwise, is great. And then you can craft it with another artifact, and for 3 mana, and you got an artifact that for 1 mana explores on target creatures. So, it's great. And keep in mind that those 2-faced artifacts in blue-red, when you have a couple of those 3/3 pirates that need artifact entering the battlefield for them to attack, these are a great thing for like later game, because if you cannot like play an artifact in one turn, you just flip this thing, and that counts as artifact entering the battlefield. The 3/3s can attack again. So if you have those, they gain an additional mini synergy. Trap, I selected Digside Conservator, 2-mana artifact. It's a 2/1. Sacrifice it to exile up to 4 cards in a single graveyard. Activate only as a sorcery. And when it dies, you may pay 4 to discover 4. I think that this card, first of all, it targets an archetype that is not strong. You should be beating the graveyard decks just on pure merit. You don't need a card that houses them. That's just like too much. And then the card is pretty useless against the decks that you might have problems with winning. So like dinosaurs, or it doesn't do much against dinosaurs. It doesn't do much against mirror. It doesn't do much against white, blue, and red, white. So it's just not. 4 mana is eternity in this format. Like, when are you going to have time to sacrifice something in order to exile something and pay 4 mana? Or when do you have time to just leave 4 mana untapped to chump with it? It's just no, it just doesn't work. Paper Decoy was good because you only paid 2 mana in Kamigani on Dynasty. Paying 4 is just too much. I can see that this card would be good if the graveyard decks were great, but they're not. So who cares? Blue-green. And here we enter a realm of, this is weird data, but it's also based on very small sample size. It's interesting, though. The top common for blue-green turns out to be staggering size. So +3/+3 and trample for 2 mana. That was a bit surprising to me, but it seems there actually might be some merit to it. Why wouldn't we play green-blue as an aggro tempo deck? If blue is just such a good aggressive color in this format, then why wouldn't green-blue utilize it? The only problem with that is that it is a bit disheveled in a way that blue wants to attack in the air and green wants to put large chonkers and attack on the ground. But staggering size is both with both of those categories of creatures, because It's nice to double up in size your flyer that is not blocked, and it's also good to play on a 5/4 dinosaur to make it an 8/7 Trumpler. So I guess this is the way. Cogwork Wrestler is the hidden gem. The card is good in almost every blue deck, but I decided to showcase it here. 57.6% game in hand win rate. I thought this creature might be poor again, as I said earlier, because there's not many X ones, but it always does something. And there's always space for it in your mana curve. And there's so many situations when I'm like looking at my hand and situations in the combat, and I think, you know what would be great if I had Cogwork Wrestler in my hand, and try to think about it. Like play some games when you have a blue deck, and think about every combat and think, would it be good to have a Cogwork Wrestler in that particular situation? And very frequently the answer is yes. And then the body that it leaves behind is so useful for crafting, because it usually chumps something, saves you 3 life, and then gets you the craft. And it's a trap, and that's interesting. Poison Dart Frog is actually having a pretty low win rate in this color combination, 53.4. I showcased it because people just assume that maybe this card is an automatic auto-include in any green deck. It seems that in blue-green it just doesn't do so well. Probably you don't want to ramp into super big things. You want to play this kind of like early aggressive game when you play maybe some 1-drop flyer into a 2-drop into a 3-drop, and then there's no space for playing the Poison Dart Frog because you want to spend your first turns into applying pressure. So that's interesting. It will need some more data for blue-green to be able to figure out what it wants to do from the data, because there's just not enough. But at least my initial idea is that it does really want to be a simpler aggro deck that can utilize the power of flyers and the mid-sized green aggressive creatures plus combat tricks. Okay. In terms of uncommons, would you be surprised that Zoetic Glyph is the top uncommon blue archetype? No. 61.7% this time. Again, Lodestone Needle is doing decent-ish with 57.7% win rate. And weirdly, the trap here was the Brontodon, and I don't know why. The only thing that I came to think is that Trashy B will not perform well in those decks because good blue-green decks will be heavier on the blue, and they might have a problem casting the Trashy B. But again, small sample sizes for those blue-green decks, so don't draw super stark conclusions based on what I'm telling about. Black-red. Top common, Tithing Blade. Again, 1 in the black for an edict that flips into a drain 1 every turn, 59% win rate roughly. That's pretty solid for this archetype. This archetype has average 53, so this is way above par. Seems like a very important card for those decks. As a hidden gem, I selected Fanatical Offering. Card still goes quite late. And it also shows that as black-red also wants to do small things and then draw cards using things like Fanatical Offering. So don't sleep on those card draw cards in red, in black, if you're going to play Mardu color pairs. A trap, Idol of the Deep King, the 2 and a red artifact with flash, and it deals 2 damage to something on ETB, and then you can flip it into a +2/+0 equipment. 52%, not impressive at all. Just a meh. Bunch of the cards that are like having the lowest win rate in black-red are just generally not picked by anyone, so they are not really traps if no one wants to pick them. In terms of uncommons, Deep Cavern Bat. That's true for almost every black archetype except for the black-blue, which will have, of course, Zoetic Glyph. This card is really strong in black-red. 63.4, amazing. This is the reason to be in black. I think this is the really like the card you're going to see frequently that you, if you see it late, you might start thinking, you know what, I might go into black. And black decks can trophy in this format. Yes, black has a slightly lower win rate, but I had trophy with black with the Golgari, and it was not like based on descent. It was just based on having a bunch of deep cavern bats, a bit of discard, a bit of like the death touchers with mill, and then some like decent quality cards like Chupacabra and a bunch of green dinosaurs, and that was it in the deck, and it was enough to trophy. As a hidden gem, I selected Defossilize because, again, this card is picked slightly lower, but I think it's a valid strategy. Card is powerful. 5 mana for reanimation is on the expensive side, but those 2 explores you get on your target are actually quite decent. So I had fun playing it. I played it as a splash in my dinosaur deck yesterday, and it was fine there. I did draw it only once, but it was a very impactful play in that particular game. It's at 57.4, so not like super high win rate, but it's mainly that Deep Cavern Bat has just so outstandingly good win rate in this color combination that Defossilize is close to the top uncommons. And it's a trap, Dreadmaw's Ire. Somehow this card in this deck is only 52% win rate. So I don't know what kind of stock to put into that finding, but definitely I would observe how it's going to develop later. Black green. The key commons, the best common was actually Join the Dead, the 1 black removal spell, -5/-5 until turn, or if you have Descent, -10/-10, 58.7% win rate. And then Hidden Gem, and again, very strongly I want to stress on smallest of possible sample sizes that 17 lens will still display, but it's there, and again, I'm drawing your attention to those cards so that you can maybe experiment a bit with those cards and figure out for yourself if they're good or bad, is In the Presence of Ages. 2 and a green for an instant, reveal the top 4 cards at your library. You may put a creature card and or a land from them into your hand, and then put the rest into your graveyard. So good chance that you're going to draw 2 cards if your deck consists mainly of creatures and lands. So I guess what it tells me about the format is that there are decent black-green decks that want to have a good mixture of creatures and lands. And apart from that, it's like draw 2 in green, which usually doesn't get that effect, plus filling the graveyard for some kind of a graveyard synergy. Why not? Trap, again, the Deep Goblin Skulls Taker, but it could have been easily the Mycoid Brood something, the 4/3 that makes fungus tokens. Also pretty low. All those cards like don't do enough, and then triggering Descent every turn is not easy. And so many times you just want to do it on the opponent's turn, and then those cards don't do anything. It's just like a can of worms, opening a can of worms to figure out how these things should work. In terms of uncommons, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be surprised about the Deep Cavern Bat. It's also good in black-green. Hidden Gem, 59. Oh, the Bat has 64% win rate. Again, really good for a black deck. Hidden Gem I selected is Jade Sea Stones, 3 and a green for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you put 3+1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control, and you can craft it for 7 mana with a creature, and it flips into a 7/7 that gains you as much life as the mana value, I think, of the creature that you exile. So yeah, cool ability. And it got 60%. This is the sort of uncommon version of Honey Mammoth, which means it's slightly more powerful than Honey Mammoth, but also goes for the later game even than Honey Mammoth did. Still, 60%, it means that it does enough and it works well enough to do some winning. In terms of trap, I put the Signpost uncommon, Akawali, the Seething Tower, because it only has 54% win rate, which is not anything super impressive. And people will just probably pick it and try to build around it, because in Constructed, you can just turbo it, and when you cast it on turn 3, it's going to be like a 7/7 already at the start. JPSN, Signpost can be traps. Remember this samurai thing in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty? That was definitely a trap. And this one, maybe people figure out better how to build those Descent decks in green and black. But maybe they don't. And I would strongly encourage you to at least sometimes experiment with your drafting a bit so that you can maybe find something new and communicate it. That's important. I had success with Golgari, but I didn't play the Descent deck. I played as a mid-range aggro with utilizing the marionettes with Death Touch as a perfect removal together with the bite spells and fight spells, and with some recursion like the Another Chance and some big chunky creatures or middle-sized still chunky creatures. So yeah, you can play that deck. But I think that data slightly suggests that the graveyard shenanigans are not really particularly good in this particular color combination. It's much better in Dimir, it seems to me, from what the data is showing. Red-green. And here we have key commons. Red-green obviously is the dinos, but actually the most important common is the Poison Dart Frog. And this data shows, and I wholeheartedly agree that Frog is just such an important card for this deck. Because Frog allows you several things. It will ramp you to your 4-drops on turn 3. Dinos are expensive. You might want to play some splashes in this particular deck. For example, for the Reanimator. And if you do that, you also want to cycle your Land Cyclers. And if you cycle your Land Cyclers, if you draw the Land Cycler later and you have one of the one swamp that you put in your deck that you wanted to find with it, having a Poison Dart Frog allows you to cast that spell because it provides the second black pit because you already have your swamp. So that's pretty good. And I also find it nice that if you remember the original Jurassic Park, well, creation of the dinosaurs would not have been possible without the frogs that filled in the gaps in their DNA. And I find it nice that here also the frog provides the gaps that is filled in order for the dinosaurs to be possible. I would have fought you, Alex. Yeah, I would have fought you. I don't think that Poison Dart Frog is the best green common. I would have lost. I'm not like particularly expert in fighting, but some people still try to play it. I think the chat is asking, is Goblin Tomb Raider a trap? We're gonna get there in a second, but yeah, Poison Dart Frog is very, very important for those dinosaurs decks. And then good part about them is that they are relatively flat on power level. So between the best common Frog and then common number 7 or 8, there was not much difference in terms of win rate. They're all basically at this 59 to 58% game in hand win rate. And the gem I picked is Cavern Stomper because that one has the lowest alpha, so it goes latest in the draft, so people don't pick it. It's good to know that this card is not picked very highly, but it's also good to know that it has high win rate in dinosaurs despite being a 6-drop. Goblin Tomb Raider, I picked it as a trap with a 50% game in hand win rate, mainly because that card is picked quite highly. And I didn't have like another good candidate. I didn't want to say that there are no traps in the dinosaur matchup deck building. Because there are, and the Goblin Tomb Raider was the one that I decided to showcase here. It's not. I think that most of the people that watch my streams know that, but maybe not all of them. So it's always good to mention that something is not working. This is one of the top win rate red commons again. So I'm just sometimes putting those cards on the list just to make people think for a second that the fact that they look at the table that it's one of the top commons in on 17 lands, it doesn't mean that it's a top common in every single archetype. It can be actively bad in some of them. Like Frog was. I mean, Frog was the worst thing. It was a trap in blue-green, but it's actually a star in red-green. And after 10 color archetypes, we finally found one where the signpost is actually the top win rate card. And it's Quinn, Firstborn of Gishath, is the best red-green uncommon. One of the main reasons for that is that it is a 2-drop dinosaur, which there are only 2 in this set. But you can play it as a 4-drop, and then it's really oppressive. The haste on it is just so sweet. It's beautiful. It's great. It works fine. The hidden gem I selected was a Tendril of the Myco Tyrant, and that's the 2-drop 2/2 that for 7 mana you can turn a land into a 7/7 creature, basically. The funny part is that I prepared the slides, and just before going to sleep, I said, I'm just going to make one draft. And I drafted dinosaurs of all the things. And I had 2 Tendrils of the Myco Tyrants, and they were just so good in my deck. I made the 7/7 so frequently. I had this 4 mana dino that gives me 2 green mana at the beginning of my main phase. So often I just use that mana to turn something into a 7/7. They were oppressive, those Tendrils of the Myco Tyrants. And if you think that this card is clunky, reminds me a lot of this common from, what was that, Ravnica Allegiance with Adapt 4. There was a 2-drop that for 6 mana you can turn into a 6/6 later in the game. Well, this is very similar, but it costs 1 mana more mana. It turns into a 7/7, and it doesn't turn itself, so it still stays on the board. It turns your lands into them, and they become hasty 7/7s. It's very good. It has a decent win rate, and I increased that win rate yesterday. I'm pretty sure with my draft, so should be improved. Yeah, so a good card. I really like it because with dinosaurs, this is also like why it's always so important to look at the whole plan. You really want to play the Poison Dart Frog because Poison Dart Frog is making your deck more consistent. Poison Dart Frog in this deck is not mainly used for fixing. It's mainly used for ramping. And since you're ramping, you're going to get to your 7 mana quicker. So Tendril of the Myco Tyrant is doing pretty well. The trap I selected is the Careening Minecart, because this is another card that wants to ramp you. But the problem with it is that it ramps you. You need early drops, and you don't have early drops in that deck. That's the main problem with it. So Careening Minecart isn't going to be particularly good. And also the initial data suggests that the card is not amazing in general in any of the archetypes. So it's like mid kind of even in the artifact synergy kind of things. Right. That's it for which colors, which cards are important in which color. Now we can talk about the openness, the last thing, and that I have in stock for you today. Openness is basically the measurement I calculated, and that's that I invented and calculate. It's how many good cards in each color pair will you see per draft. And good cards, of course, it's hard to define what a good card is. I pick a cutoff that is based on game and hand win rate. And I pick only cards with a game and hand win rate 56 or more. Now, the problem with that is, of course, and I'm aware of that problem before you start berating me in the chat, as it always happens, that this measure is partially tautological. So good color combinations will have many more cards that have a game and hand win rate of 56% or more. Therefore, they will be more open because there are more good cards. But it's still nice to see that, because you will see colors that have similar win rates but have a very different measures of openness, and this is the kind of thing where you can actually start analyzing something. So I'm not going to be surprised if I look at the openness data and I see that Azorius is the most open. It has the highest win rate. It will probably have the most cards open. But if we go deep into the early slides, Azorius and Izzet have a very similar win rate. So if I see that there's a difference between those two, I would conclude that, the one that is more open is probably actually easier to abuse, but the one that is less open and still has the same win rate probably has a higher potential in the future format. So 2 things that you can take away from those things. One, if you are very open, you can possibly maybe not force it, but draft with preferences this particular deck. 2, if something has disproportionately low openness and still has a high win rate, then you will sort of improve that particular color in the future, hopefully. So I actually put the 2 graphs together next to side by side, so that's I was smarter than I remember. Most open color, white blue. Second most Izzet. But these are having same win rate, which again makes me think that right now this is the moment to start forcing white blue, and this is the moment to think about how to build blue red better for the future when people will start maybe drafting a bit more white blue, and is going to become slightly more open. White red and white green, equal amount of the good cards open. It's interesting. That makes me think that there's still potential of building better Selesnya decks. Red green, 30 cards, only good cards you see per draft, so it's going to be hard to force this particular deck. Going to interesting how it's going to develop. I think that Dinos is the kind of a deck you have to, very much like into Selesnya, you have to sort of draft into it. You cannot force it. Well, I think that Jeskai colors, you can right now sort of soft force them, especially because they're interwoven. So if you start in one of the colors, you can always pivot to the second pair, depending what is the second that is open. And I don't think you can do that with the dinosaurs, because they're just such a specific kind of thing. You can start with some red. No, it's not. It's not card strength, because it's not linked to how many strong cards you have. It's linked to how many strong cards will you see per draft. So it's a mixture of how many of them are there, but also how are they picked in the draft. If people started picking the Azorius cards much higher today, even though they would have the same win rate, you would see fewer of them, so the color would be less open. Yep. There is an influence of the color strength on how open those colors are, because of how I selected what a strong card is. But I still think that how open the color is, again, especially you can see that when you compare things like Azorius and Izzet, similar strength color combinations, very different numbers of cards being open. So here you can see clearly Azorius is much more open, because despite having the same win rate, you see much more cards over 56% in that color. Does it show that we should draft white as the opening color? No, not necessarily. White is a strong color. That's for sure be the case. But so is red. So is blue. I don't think that you should have that strong prescriptive conclusions from anything that I'm saying, because this is not going to improve you as a player. As I said, I mean, I just had trophies with Golgari and really good results with dinosaurs, and you don't need to force anything. I think that this format is a moderately draft the hard way with a strong preference kind of format, where you want to position yourself in probably blue or white or red, but you want to make sure that you match them with another color that is relatively open. So yeah. Just see for those signals, see for cards that are going to be very important for those decks, like some of the cards that I mentioned to you in the presentation. Watch those carefully. You see them pick 6, 7, you speculate on them, and then maybe you weave into the right color, because that's how I ended up in Golgari, for example. I started drafting. I had some like couple of good dinosaurs, but very quickly I noticed that red is completely gone. Someone next to me, probably 2 players next to me, were drafting red, and I couldn't get anything out of it, and definitely no dinosaurs. So I just kept those good green dinosaurs, and I saw that I got like black cards, and I just built this kind of draft the good cards, green black, without any synergies. So this is the kind of useful thing that you can navigate those drafts without having I think preference is important, but it shouldn't be like, oh, we have to draft white. No, you don't have to. Golgari was smashing those white blue decks because they were just not coping with with my marionettes. How critical is prioritizing removal? Depends on what you're playing. I think for some decks, it's important to have at least a bunch of it. Any kind of like blue-white control wants quite a lot of removal, because it needs to survive to the point where it can accrue enough advantage. Deck like Tempo needs some, and that's where the unlucky drop is so great. But you also want to make sure that you have the 1, 2, 3 curve out in those kind of decks. But green decks like green-white dinos you don't need that much removal. You can get some, because some of it is actually specific for you. But what you want to have is those staggering growths, or how is it called? Staggering sizes. Because these are sort of weird type of removal when you can use it as a removal, because you're forcing your opponent to tapping out and also blocking. And then you just like the things that you can achieve in this format. Yeah, I'm not gonna shame my opponents, but I mean, if you force them into thinking that they have to block something, you can lead to amazing blowouts with your +3/+3 trump. My best win, I played like a super long game with the dinosaurs, and I played my threats in order of how threatening they are. And my opponent just had all the removal. So I played a 3/3 dinosaur, 4/3 dinosaur with the explorer, another of those, they're all dead, because I was building up to play the 5/3 that makes eggs in the end. Because I knew that I don't want to play it too early, because my opponent seemed like the kind of a controlling deck that has a lot of removal. And I played like 5 of those dinosaurs, and every single one was killed. Then they played then I played the 5/3, and they still had 1 removal and killed it. And in the end, how I won the game was I flipped my Saheeli's Lattice, exiling all those dinosaurs that they killed, and I had like 14/4 dinosaur artifact. The only problem is that they had a bunch of blockers, and I had to have the staggering growth in order to deal the last damage. So I was basically waiting with the 13/4 until the last turn I was alive, and then I drew in the last possible turn staggering growth, and I managed staggering size, and I managed to win it. But again, this is another way of looking at the strategy of playing by not dropping your most dangerous drops too early, because you want to make sure that the opponent is clear of removal when you play it. And I played that strategy there. It didn't work completely, because my Palanque Hatcher did not survive, because they had 1 more removal than I was expecting them to have. Still, in the end, I managed to win, because they didn't have removal for my 13/4, which was always threatening on the board, and I managed to draw in the right time the trample trick. But okay, to look a bit more about the cards, blue-black is more open than the win rate would suggest. It has like 26%, 26 good cards seen per draft, but it only has like 53.9% win rate, similar than all the other colors that have a significantly lower count of the open good cards. And this makes me think blue-black can improve over time in the future, because there's more good cards seen per draft than in the other, and it still has a low win rate, which means that win rate is lowered, probably because of the bad building of the decks. And this is a very frequent thing that happens, that those controlling decks, those slower decks, are much harder to build, and it takes days to figure out exactly how to link those interactions. They also usually have a handicap of having slightly lower win rate, because control decks are just harder to play. You have more decisions to be made, more chances of opponent top decking something if there is a bomb heavy format. So all those things are coming slightly against win rates of those controlling decks. So I will be very careful about them. As soon as we get the proper draft data from 17 lands in the public data sets, I'm going to go deeper into looking at what makes those slower deck ticks, because I think this format, definitely there is going to be something I'm going to be doing on the speed of formats and analyzing all the numbers on what speed means and how to analyze it and how to decide that my deck should be on the draw and stuff like that. So I'm going to hopefully figure that one out when time comes and it's right. All right, but for today, this is it. It's been long enough, I would say. But I would, of course, like to thank 17 Lands team. It's never easy to get this early data out. You require so many things to make it work. So yeah, especially Ale Ballini, the ZTM, he puts titanic work behind it, and of course, Viral Misnomer, Rob. Who actually, if you go to my YouTube, there is a nice episode of me talking with Rob about new features of 17 Lands. So I would strongly recommend you becoming a patron of 70 Lands and helping them, because each penny counts for them, and they are putting a product that is just amazing. And as a patron, you actually have some decent bonuses from them, so give them a bit of loving. I would like to very much thank Fake Jake Brown, again with the typo for some reason. Sometimes I have half of my presentations have his name with the E at the end and half not. This time it's not, so it's a wrong name. It actually should be Fake Jake Brown with an E at the end, who is the editor of my podcast version of it. So thanks to him, he's amazing. And thanks to Assescu and Mana Junkie for the music that I'm using in my podcast version. And of course, thanks to mtgazone.com and my patrons for supporting what I'm doing. It really goes a long way to get some support, because otherwise, motivation is down, especially my wife's motivation. And with that, I'll see you next week. And who knows what we're going to talk about. But see you next week.